A homeless shelter in Kansas is shutting its doors after being defunded due to a government shortfall. That's always a heartwarming story. The Choices Family Emergency Shelter that houses around 350 homeless people annually, many of them children, will no longer be available because it got barely half the funding it needed from the government to keep its doors open. Stephen Lohr, Executive Director of the Southeast Kansas Community Action Partnership, the company that operates Choices, told Think Progress that this was the first time in their 48-year history that they couldn't get enough state funding to continue operation of the shelter. So where did that money go? Oh, no, that's a good question. Where did it go? Tax cuts for the rich. That's where it went. Yes, in 2012, Brownback in the Kansas legislature passed a huge round of tax cuts that they promised would help create jobs and boost the economy. So what happened? Obviously, not that. Even with these tax cuts, job growth was very modest, and the state's revenue collection was about half of what Brownback had promised. The state budget office projects slow growth in both personal income and GDP. Oh, and by the way, Kansas also got their credit rating downgraded by Moody's. Because of all this, surprise, surprise, the state has had to cut back on a lot of help for the poor, including homeless shelters, and more cuts are, of course, expected to make up for the massive budget hole left by these tax cuts. So what's Brownback going to do to fix this problem? Well, he's going to double down on cutting taxes even more. He said, quote, "I want to continue to get that income tax down because that's the one that holds back so many states. I want to get us down further as a low-tax state to create jobs and opportunities. The government's going to have plenty of money. It's the people I want to have money." Yes, the government is going to have plenty of money. That's why it's closing down homeless shelters and cutting social services across the state. And that's why all of these families are going to have to find a new place to stay or end up in the street. That is, of course, until they pass one of those anti-homeless sleeping laws, and then they'll end up in prison. Yay. What do you guys think? Sean, we'll go with you.
Yeah, so this like strategy of cutting the tax rates and flattening out the tax code has worked in a few states. Utah, John Huntsman, the reason people thought he was going to be the president, could have been a president, is because he was one of those guys who installed close to a flat tax in his state, and he was able to make it work. The problem with this plan is they left in all the deductions. Like the whole point was we're going to get rid of certain deductions and lower the tax rates. But then nobody wanted to get rid of the deduction.
Middle class people?
The home mortgage deduction, which I don't see why.
Middle class people, yes.
Yeah, and poor people who rent should pay more in taxes than people who own homes. I don't see how that's fair. So there are a whole bunch of deductions that they left in that they were supposedly going to take out. That was the point. They're like, we're going to take out these deductions, and that's how the math is going to work. And then they couldn't get the deductions out, but they passed it anyway because they're like, fuck it, we'll do it live and just see how it works, and that's going to be a problem.
Well, they couldn't pass those deductions, or they couldn't get rid of those deductions because obviously those are super popular. And so, yeah, this just shows that further that Republicans don't care about math, they don't care about deficits. They're going to do what's politically expedient, politically popular, and they're going to blow a hole in the deficit. And on top of that, they're going to blame Obama. Brownback literally has gone on to say that it's President Obama's policies that have failed, not mine. Fucking ridiculous. Becca?
The other thing that's really upsetting about this, having the only homeless shelter for 11 counties shut down is already pretty terrible. They've also cut their school budgets to the point that the Kansas Supreme Court said it was unconstitutionally low, at which point they had no choice but to go ahead and redistribute from other school districts who still needed the money, just hadn't gotten so low as to be unconstitutionally low. So not only if you're just talking, if they're saying, okay, it's bad right now, but it'll even out in the future, not if you're not letting future entrepreneurs even get an education because all of your school districts have such low funding. When you're trying to operate at 57% of your expected government budget, that's going to be a problem. And yes, being a deep red state, they're going to make cuts to social services first, and then to things like education. But that future argument doesn't work when you're making cuts to education. You're dealing with a government that apparently thinks that the solution to having a lot of people in poverty is to cut food stamps because it will make them work. But setting aside that ideological disagreement, nobody can argue that cutting education leads to a better future economy.
Well, they don't care about no education.
Leads to a better future.
What's that?
Cutting education leads to a better future. No,
yes. Better future for who? A better future for corporations that rely on unskilled, low-paid labor.
Can I just point out that one of the reasons that education spending always gets cut is because that's like the bulk of a state's budget, since they don't have a military. And education spending doesn't always correlate with education results. In New York, we spend $17,000 per student, which is like third in the nation, and we're like 33rd in the nation in our rankings. Like, it's not always. It depends how you spend it. But like, again, the Kansas governor had a surplus, and he blew it because he did half of his plan. Like, he did exactly what your conservative adult politicians say that they'll never do. He did not have the quote-unquote adult conversation. He didn't say, if we're going to cut taxes like this, we got to get rid of deductions like this. He was like, nah, you keep your taxes and your deductions. Don't worry about it. Like, you can't, like, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, yeah.
But yeah, education spending is bad, and so are children.
No, they're not. No, they're not. Look, I don't have a problem with spending a large amount of money on education. Because it's fucking education. Everybody needs an education. That's how countries are successful. Look. Look. If you're spending it on bullshit involved with education, okay, and wasting it on stuff that you shouldn't waste it on, okay, I can understand that. Maybe you need a little bit of oversight. But dude, education. An educated populace ends up being unproductive.
You need a lot of bit of oversight, because there's like warehouses in, like, I remember Michelle Rhee, who everybody hated. I know we're getting a little off topic, but one of the best things she did in human history ever was go to the warehouse where all the school supplies were being stored for no reason, when there was like no books in the classroom. Like, we waste a shit ton of money on education.
I'm going to assume that you were just being sort of flippant by saying education spending generally is bad, but to an argument that is not the argument you were making, but is an argument that people make. I really don't think that the solution to education misspending is ever to cut the education budget. I just don't see that actually fixes anything. I also don't think the solution is more administrators, because it seems like the more administrators there are, the more these sorts of mishaps happen.
Good point.
But it also kind of, I mean, while New York may have a disproportionately high education budget for their education results, they also have a disproportionately high cost of living. It makes sense that things cost more compared to this area of the country, Oklahoma, Arkansas, Kansas, where we have terrible education results and we're spending next to nothing on it. It seems like if you want to improve, maybe that's a place to start. Instead saying it will be good for the state if we cut everything that's feeding any of our citizens that I don't like, and also cut money for the children.
And you left one thing out of it. Give that money to the corporations and the rich. Because that's what they're doing.